the U.S. has really been unwavering in its support for Israel during this war. And we've seen that really from day one, where they have said Israel has a right to defend itself, to take out Hamas, and we will stand with it. It has defended Israel at the ICJ today, and as you noted, is bringing forth its own proposal in front of the UN. What it has sought to do is to essentially shield Israel from international community pressure to immediately pursue a permanent ceasefire. What the U.S. is calling for instead is the release of all hostages in exchange for a temporary ceasefire. Whether or not it will pass remains to be seen.
Well, Carmiel, how telling is it to you that we are using the words, the U.S. is using the words temporary ceasefire when before it was pauses?
I would say potato, potato. The truth is, in practice,
really?
Those are the same
It seemed
things.
It mattered initially.
It mattered because the rhetoric mattered to the people who were hearing it. So Israel needed to hear at the beginning of this war that the United States was going to stand behind it through a pause. And by not using the word ceasefire, they avoided joining the international community and pressuring Israel to stop its operation in Gaza or to restrain itself. The U.S. has shifted in its rhetoric, in part because as the war has gone on, the toll has been, in fact, devastating. It's been devastating for nearly 30,000 Gazans who have been killed, and it's remained devastating for Israelis who are displaced from their homes and remain in fear so long as Hamas remains in power. That said, the U.S. is also conscious of its own domestic constituency and the pushback that it is getting for its support for Israel. And so with that in mind, they've started to adopt language like a temporary ceasefire, mirroring calls for a permanent ceasefire, but not actually demanding it. And so in practice, the reality is the same. The question will only be that through negotiations, how long a pause or a ceasefire actually lasts.
The vote in the Security Council yesterday, 15 members, was 13-1. The UK abstained. Carmiel, what did the other members think of the U.S. veto?
The United States faces a huge amount of opposition and pressure around the world, particularly among its Arab allies, for its support for Israel. That's not new to this conflict. That's something that has gone on for a long time. But the U.S. has also shown that it is willing to stand up at the UN, to stand on its own 2 feet, to use its veto power at the Security Council to assert itself as a world leader. The reality is that the international community, and specifically the UN, has been ineffective to date in driving peace or progress between Israelis and Palestinians. That has been done most effectively, although with limits, between the parties themselves through the support of negotiations and through the support of countries like the United States and other Arab allies who are bringing the countries together behind closed doors.
Well, Carmiel, as you talk about the U.S. standing up to those at the UN, I wonder about the U.S. standing up more so, President Biden specifically, to Benjamin Netanyahu. One of our opinion columnists here at Bloomberg, Andreas Kluth, had a piece out this morning that says the right-wing government of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and its seemingly indiscriminate war in the Gaza Strip, which may yet be ruled genocidal, is leaving Biden little choice. He must distance himself if he doesn't want to sacrifice American credibility in the so-called global South forever. Is that really what is at risk here?
I think that Joe Biden is dealing with a difficult dilemma in that he deeply supports Israel, the state, the country, the cause. But he has always had challenges with Netanyahu, and we have seen that all the way through. He does not support the government itself or many of the positions that Netanyahu has pursued, particularly as Netanyahu has both veered to the right with his right-wing government, but also is making decisions in many cases that are motivated by his own personal interest in remaining in power as he faces corruption charges. And so those tensions have always been there. And so Biden has done a really good job of differentiating between the needs of the state of Israel and the politics of Netanyahu. We are seeing that conflict really come into the spotlight. And I would frankly expect it to worsen as we come into the Ramadan holiday, where Netanyahu is thinking very much about his domestic political audience, and Biden is much more concerned about the safety and security of the region and the U.S.'s role.
Carmiel, that U.S. proposal before the Security Council that we're talking about here warns against an Israeli assault on Rafah. We're separately seeing stories today on the terminal. The U.K. is considering restricting arms sales to Israel if, in fact, Israel launches an offensive in Rafah. It appears that it's just a matter of timing here. It's a question of when, not if, that occurs. Will that be a turning point in Western support for Israel?
Yeah, so the Israelis say that they have taken out about half of Hamas operatives, and that Rafah really remains the one major stronghold of Hamas battalions. Mm-hmm. It's notable that Israeli operatives extracted 2 hostages who were being held in Rafah. This is really only the second time they've successfully done this through an operation. And so the Israelis have made clear that in order to achieve their objectives in Gaza of removing Hamas from power, that they believe they must enter Rafah. This is, as you know, deeply concerning for the international community. There are more than 1.5 million Palestinian civilians who have been displaced into Rafah, who have been pushed further to the south. Many have been displaced multiple times, are living in tent encampments. If they are displaced yet again, we could be talking about only a worsened humanitarian crisis in the region. It will cause significant tensions between Israel and the international community. And that's part of the reason that the U.S. is trying to fold this in to a UN effort, but really also focusing on negotiations privately with the Israelis, where they have insisted that they must put forward a credible, implementable proposal for dealing with those civilians.